subjects, which has been advertised on my blog and on the Pension Playpen, so I don't need to go through that again. Bobby, do you want to introduce yourself, and I will moderate?
Yeah. Thank you, Henry. So I'm a professional trustee now, and I'm managing director of HS Trustees, relaunching it into the marketplace. In my past life, I've been senior investment consultant, built a few investment practices, including Capita's investment practice. And I've very much been working in the ESG area for about 4 or 5 years. So I do have some slides for this morning, which I'll open up in a moment, but I'll just give you the main message before I go into the slides. So for the last few years, the bar's been raised for pension schemes, and they've been dragged into the ESG environment by legislation. It's fair to say now that I think most of the work that's going on in pension schemes to do with ESG, especially with the various codes coming out, is reporting. And to make a difference in the world and to make a difference in ESG and climate, we need action. So my call to the industry now is to turn that on its head, so that most of the work that goes into ESG is action and not reporting. And I released an article on this last week, and the slides basically go through the main points of that article. And what I put forward in this presentation is a potential solution. It might not be the only solution, it might not be the ideal solution, but rather than just ask the question, leave it out there, I like to put a straw man up so that people can then decide whether that's the right solution or not. And the solution's gaining quite a lot of traction anyway, but not for the reason that I'm going to say now in this presentation. So hopefully the slide deck works properly. I'll open it up. Can everybody see those slides okay? Yeah, good. So just a bit of background to start with. So pension schemes have been the target of legislation for a few years now, because first of all, the K review said that pension schemes held the majority of shares in the UK and they weren't voting on them. They were being silently held. Fast forward to the Paris Climate Agreement, when coming out of that was agreement by countries around the world to reduce emissions, and sure enough, the target then went straight onto pension schemes again. So pension schemes were then required to do TCFD reporting, so reporting on the financial impact of climate change. All schemes have been required for a few years now to disclose their ESG stewardship and engagement policies in their statement of investment principles. That's all schemes apart from schemes below 100 members. And for a few years now, there's been, a few years now, there's been a implementation statement required, whereby DB schemes must report on how their stewardship and engagement policy has been followed through the year. And these schemes must also do that, but also report on how they've acted in accordance with their statement of investment principles. And that requirement is coming down the line for DB pension schemes as well. So what's been the result of this legislation? So I said I've been talking and working in ESG for a number of years now, and since I've been a trustee, I've been like a magnet for people to come in and say, "Oh, pension schemes are doing a lot on ESG, aren't they?" And the main message was from experts outside of pensions: pension schemes are doing ESG badly. In particular, experts looked at the TCFD reporting, and they looked at the modelling in the reporting. The TCFD does not strictly require modelling, but it requires scenarios. And so what happened in the industry, when models didn't exist in the world to do proper climate modelling, So pension schemes are then required to do climate modelling for a pension scheme. That's a really hard thing to do. And so what the consultants did was they used their normal asset liability modelling. Now, that was the tools they had available, but traditional asset liability modelling was never designed to allow for a big external event like climate risk. It was designed to come up with the answer, how much equities and bonds do you need, when climate risk is a risk that could potentially destroy capital markets. So I spent a lot of time educating people outside pensions that pension schemes have been dragged into this and doing the best they can. They are not experts, and pension schemes shouldn't be blamed for the work that they've done here. They've been trying their best. So from that, it's clear, and the general conclusion everybody can quite quickly come to is that while pension schemes can't solve the climate change or can't solve biodiversity or can't solve the social problems in the world, they can play a significant role. And it's also clear that without this regulation, we wouldn't be here having these discussions today to the extent that we are. I think the regulation has definitely raised the bar. And it's also brought experts in to help pension schemes understand what impact they can have and how we can make the world a better place. But the current approach has a few problems now that we're at that point. So the big schemes, most of the big schemes who are producing TCFD reports are spending most of the time that they have for ESG related masters on producing these reports. And it's fair to say, looking at the reports, they're a mixed bag in terms of quality because they're new reports and the modelling didn't exist and the format of writing these reports didn't exist beforehand. If we then look at what's coming, so the industry, the Task Force for Nature Financial Disclosures has produced TNFD rules. The Task Force on Social Factors has reported. If we layer onto TCFD, TNFD, and social factors, it's just not going to work. There's just no time there to do this, and especially as pension schemes have got a lot of other governance things to deal with. It doesn't really work. Irrespective of the fact that TNFD already takes up a significant amount of time for the big schemes that do TNFD. For small schemes, it's actually even worse. The DB implementation statement, which is produced on an annual basis, costs anything from 25% to 10% of their annual investment budget. Now, if you think all a scheme needs to do an investment strategy and investment consulting, a small scheme, if a lot of their budget is taken up by an implementation statement, which for most schemes looks very generic, it doesn't have anything scheme specific in there, then they've just got everything squeezed out of them in terms of ESG. How can they spend any more time on other stuff when small schemes we're already struggling to pay a significant amount of money for investment? It's been a well-known fact for a number of years that small schemes, we're not getting the standard of investment consulting of the big schemes because it's very expensive and they couldn't afford it within their budget. So to have a report which has come in, which takes up such a significant amount of their investment consulting budget in one go, which is very generic, doesn't seem ideal. But going back to the point I made earlier, it has raised the bar. So even the small schemes, I've seen some very, very good voting reports within the packages that come along with these reports. It's just, is it worth paying that much money for that when there are other important things to do for the schemes? So just take a step back, and this isn't necessarily ESG or climate focused, but if you ask the question, how you've got a risk within your pension scheme, there's a risk within pension scheme world, climate risk, for example, how would you assess and manage climate risk? Then what you would do is you'd first assess the risks, then you would identify the opportunities. You then put a strategy in place for the scheme, and then you disclose and monitor. The way pension schemes have been brought in, they've been brought in at the bottom. They've been brought in at this disclosure point. So currently, you start with disclosure. You may have seen discussion about transition plans. In very simple terms, a transition plan is assessing all your risks and deciding how you're going to manage them going forward. And for climate change, it's how you're going to manage your climate risk going forward. For biodiversity, it's the same. The important point is that transition plans go back to the start. So they start by assessing the risks and then look at the opportunities. They basically look at the levers that you've got to pull. Small schemes have got very few levers they can pull. Big schemes have got quite a few more levers they can pull. But a transition plan holds it all together. Also, a transition plan doesn't need to limit itself to climate. So it could cover the risks in TNFD, it could cover the risks for biodiversity, it could cover the risks for social factors, it could be all encompassing. And similarly, the transition plan could cover the actions that schemes would need to take, looking at the issues in the implementation reports. And in fact, the small schemes, I can't see where the budget is for small schemes to do anything similar to TCFD, sorry. And again, you forget about TNFD and social factors, but transition plan, which looks at their strategy, looks at their investments, looks at their scheme and says, how can we play our bit to make the environment a better place? That, to me, seems like a potential solution for rather than spending a lot of money on an implementation statement, which is very generic. So basically, my proposal that I want the industry to start debating is that rather than go to the DWP and the regulator and say, TCFD isn't working, implementation statements aren't working, let's ditch them and come up with something else. Actually, let's come up with something which covers climate, which covers nature, which covers social factors, which is better than the current disclosures, which actually gives schemes levers to pull to go forward and to change the world. And let's work together as an industry to come up with an appropriate format of these transition plans. And then we can say to the regulator and DWP or agree with them, okay, if a scheme produces this transition plan, a big scheme, they don't have to produce TCFD. And if a small scheme produces a transition plan to this specification, then they don't need to produce implementation reports. For me, that will allow the big schemes to have actionable transition plans, which are very clear levers they can pull, and might take a bit more work than TCFD. Hopefully it wouldn't. And then they can split the actions to actually things that will make a difference rather than the reporting. And for smaller schemes, I think we could do a transition plan, I think similar in cost to the implementation statement, but it'd be a lot more useful document. And why I say the industry, because I think there's been a lot of work done on climate change and a lot of work on transition plans, and we just need to get everybody talking together to come up with these designs. Some of the transition plans I've seen so far for like countries, etc., are not appropriate for pension schemes, but we are seeing a number of pension schemes start to look at transition plans as an addition to TCFD. But what I think we need to do is come to a suite of transition plans for large and small schemes that the regulator and the DWP agree is a good replacement for TCFD. They then don't have to worry about TNFD and biodiversity report, and that can be within the transition plan. And then small schemes can have that to work on the levers that they can pull. And the reason I know there are levers small schemes can pull is because I've been working on a couple of really good initiatives this year already, which have enabled some small schemes to make a difference in for example, stewardship. So that's the introduction. That's my proposal. That's what I want us all to start talking about. And really now it's up for discussion.
Could I start the discussion by asking Chris Bumford to take yourself off mute, Chris, and ask your question? And thank you very much for that, Bobby. That's a very constructive proposal.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. I was just wondering about the transition plans, and if I was trying to sort of work out in my mind what they'd look like. Do you have a kind of sort of period that the transition plan is likely to be over, and any kind of like headings that you expect to be in all of them? I work particularly with smaller schemes, and I'm trying to imagine what it would look like for those smaller schemes.
Yeah. So I think I could do a reasonable job of putting together one for a small scheme. I think for the bigger schemes, it's going to have to be the consultants, unfortunately. I'm trying to hold my hand up and say I'm a trustee. That's the consultant's expertise. I'll help them. But for small schemes, for example, if I just give an example of what I wrote in my small schemes implementation statement this year, and this is a £7 million scheme. So, one, stewardship. We were able, by for no cost, by talking to Share Action, who came to us and said, there's a resolution going to Nestle for them to reduce the amount of sugar in their food going forward. No timescale, no amount, no dedicated amount. But the investment manager's not backing the resolution they were going to. Can you help? So my scheme spoke to their platform manager, along with a few other schemes, and we spoke to the fund manager, and the fund manager changed their mind, and actually backed the resolution, and there was a significant manager. The resolution didn't pass, but this scheme wanted to back this resolution. And so what we've put in the implementation statement is they did actually do that bit of stewardship. They're not going to be able to steward the thousands of stocks they've got in the index tracking fund, but they will get involved where it can actually make a difference. So that part would probably say, we realise that we're in pooled funds, but we also realise that we have got influence with the pooled fund managers. So if an issue comes along that we can, as part of the pensions industry, can affect the outcome in stewardship, we're happy to partake. Secondly, that scheme changed fund this year to credit fund. And what we asked the consultant to do was, as we were changing fund, can we look at the sustainable version? And we looked at the sustainable version. It wasn't very good. It had some very old restrictions on it. But we can hand on heart say in our implementation statement, when we were changing funds, we looked at the sustainable version, we kicked the tires on it, but we didn't move forward on that because it isn't appropriate for us. So those sorts of things are the things the small schemes can do and just basically put the levers in. And the timescale comes down to, it really depends what the timescale for the scheme is and what the scenario for the scheme is. I mean, that scheme cannot put in place a carbon reduction plan as such because they're invested in a big index tracker with their equities, and unless the index tracker itself reduces its carbon impact, then it can't really do anything about that. Big schemes can, small schemes in passive funds probably can't. But that's another initiative that I've been trying to push this year. I've been speaking to the index tracker managers saying, look, the small schemes can't do all the work here to decarbonise, but you run these big index tracking funds. Why can't you turn your main index tracker funds into sustainable versions and then have the levers in future if you need to do any really strong engagement or some disinvestment? I know they've launched sustainable versions, but for small clients to go into those sustainable versions is really costly. It's transfer costs, it's advice costs, etc., etc. So that was quite a long answer, but I think the thing is mainly for the small scheme, it's just identifying which levers they can actually pull without it costing them loads of money, and just understanding that they can take action at different points in time.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you. I'm going to move on. There's a question from Porrid, but before we do take that question, Derek's put some interesting stuff in chat. I don't know if you wanted me to ask that question for you, Derek. You usually do. If I don't hear from you, I will. The question is, if DB schemes are increasingly presumed to hold government gilt by TPR and many consultants, rather than equities or corporate bonds, how do you assess UK government and overseas issuers? If 2030 targets are pushed back, is there a case no longer to hold government gilts and look instead at green bonds, blue bonds, greener equities and real estate? And he adds that the voting in Nestle was 88 for 12, 88 for against,
Yeah.
sorry,
Yeah.
88-12 against, sorry.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So the first answer is ask your consultant. I'm not gonna take the easy way out by saying that. But secondly, I think what we need to do is we do need to change government policy. The big blocker to making significant progress here is government not being joined up on government policy, and government needs lobbying. It was not that long ago they approved a load more exploratory drills in the North Sea. I mean, that's not even approving the mining, that's approving exploratory drilling. So I think some of these big issues in terms of government, we need stronger voices. So one of the things I am spearheading is you will see an announcement soon, and you're going to get an early announcement on this meeting, that there's a new professional trustee group being set up, which is purely on climate change and ESG, to be a stronger voice in the market. It's been very clear that we need a really strong voice on this issue. I know there are other trustee groups out there, but similar to the way the ICSWG set up at the point it was needed in the consulting industry, we need a stronger voice. And actually, the more voices we have, the better. The thing I found very clearly going through these discussions is that the more that we talk to each other and the more we raise our voice, the more chance we have of making change and getting this on people's agendas. This meeting today is because I've been shouting about it and trying to get it on people's agendas. The more people that know, the better. And with the best will in the world, most people in the pensions industry have been bogged down by the DB funding code and the ESOG and the dashboard and everything else, which I currently am as well as a trustee. But if we don't shout about it and keep this top of the list, then top of the agenda is not going to happen, which is why this new group's going to come up. And one of the important things of that group will be to try to get government lobbying, not necessarily by doing it itself, but also by going to the consultants and say, we expect you to get involved in this lobbying. A group of all the big professional trustee firms have joined it, and we're going to be a very powerful group to start to try to steer the ship as much as we can. And it's all the ESG champions in these firms, and our job as well will be to go back to our firms and to really spread it through the other trustees. So I know there's another long answer, Derek, but I think government needs to make the environment for things to happen. So sometimes you'll hear the productive finance debate that it's the government trying to get money in for the transition. I don't think it necessarily is. It's the government trying to get money into the UK to grow the economy. I think it goes under the badge of the transition. But I think genuinely government policy being joined up on climate and ESG matters will make a massive difference.
Thanks very much, Bobby. Porrick.
Thanks, Henry. Morning, Bobby.
Morning.
It's an interesting point about trying to prevent smaller schemes from squandering their governance budget on things they don't need to do necessarily. But you suggest that the obstacle is that government's not joined up. But surely on this point they are, because anything that makes it more difficult for a small scheme to operate efficiently for the good value of members drives it into the arms of the consolidators. So what's in it for the regulator, DWP, whoever, to support something that makes it easier for smaller schemes to continue running?
Yeah, made a couple of points there. So by government strategy, I was talking about government outside pensions being joined up with pensions, and I think consolidation is not an easy solution for anybody. Somebody's going to have to find the money to consolidate these schemes. I actually think that I haven't brought this idea out of the blue. I have been speaking to people over the year about it, and I think the regulator's probably on side to a great degree here. And I think it's just as an industry, if we joined up and we have these grown-up conversations, it might happen. I think one of my early conferences as a trustee, I was speaking to a consultant and talking about some of the value that was being wasted in some of this reporting, and the answer was, well, that's the rules. And my answer was, really, we're all senior people in this industry. To be fair to the government, to the DWP, they don't have all the expertise. And they would, I think they would like the industry to be a lot more open with them. And quite often, you need to do these things where people don't lose face. So if you just respond to consultations, and the consultations have already had ideas formed in them, and when has a consultation ever been completely dished by reported? You need to get in before the consultation. We need to get closer to the policymakers to really give them what it looks like in pension world, what's actually happening in pension world, what actually makes sense, what actually doesn't make sense. And there's enough of us here who understand how, for example, consulting businesses work, that we can say, well, this will actually work, this won't actually work, this will cause them big headaches in motivation, this will cause them big headaches in profit. If you do this could work.
But that's still reliant on the policymakers having both the time and being reasonable and pragmatic enough to then make a decision.
Yes.
Good luck.
Yeah. So all I can do is get as many people on side as possible, join as many alliances as possible, and I think this trustee group is going to be very key as well. There was definitely a need for it.
Bob, I'm going to come to you in a second. Just a question from Peter Cameron Brown. Will the professional trustee pressure group be open to the independent trustee in a smaller scheme?
Sorry, I didn't quite get that.
Will the professional trustee pressure group be open to the independent trustee in a smaller scheme?
Right, yeah. So I did say professional trustee because that's what initially it's going to be. It's actually a trustee group. So it will be open to member nominated trustees, anybody who wants to get involved. It's an inclusive, not an exclusive group. And it's not necessarily a group that's going to do everything. It's going to be a group that makes a lot of noise. And I'm happy for any trustee that's on this call to be invited to the first meeting when we discuss the need for the group, etc. I'm also happy if they don't want to come to that first meeting because it's currently got a few professional trustees in, to then invite them once the terms of reference have been put together. But it's a very inclusive group and any trustee can join. The only rule is consultants are not allowed in.
Very good rule. Should the industry persuade the UK Infrastructure Bank to invest in these green bonds? Asks Adrian Furnell. Again,
I think that's a discussion you can have better with the consultants. I'm happy to get involved in those discussions, but I took the easy route, trustee.
Don't let the consultants in the room. Right, Bob Compton.
Thank you, Henry. Bobby, really as a sort of more of an outsider looking in, I see pension schemes being governed by trustees looking after the interests of the membership and the sponsoring employer, not wasting money. It seems to me that a lot of this reporting, etc., is a complete and utter waste of money. And I know you're trying to go to sort of change policy, etc., and actually try and get some common sense into reporting. But has any government official done any impact assessment as to what the benefits truly are of pension schemes actually reporting on these things and looking at the way they're doing? Has anybody actually said this is what value pension schemes can add in this process? Because it seems to me, if you're investing in a pooled fund, it's the investment manager running the pooled fund who should be looking at the ESG type opportunities or the what can be done. And I can go back to the early 90s where involved in running a very large £1 billion pension fund. Trustees wanted to actually make where they had direct investments in a pension scheme. They went to an investment manager to say, which was Schroders at the time, we want to vote in this particular way. And that Schroders said, no, we're not going to do it. They didn't actually do it. So I appreciate where pension scheme trustees want to direct the shareholders or vote on it. It's important to be able to do that. But why is the industry allowing governments and various committees to bombard it with regulation, red tape, and bureaucracy? It seems crazy, absolutely crazy to me.
Yeah, you make a very good point, and my view of the history is no, they haven't done. If they have done impact assessment, it hasn't told them that a lot of this stuff would not land very well and could cost a lot of money. And that's you can go back further than ESG and voting, just to the way that they priced defined benefit liabilities off the books. So I'm hoping that this will be the industry getting ahead and saying, look, do this and you can drop something, rather than waiting for something, rather than waiting for transition plans to land in addition to TNFD and social factors and TCFD. But I agree that most of what the government's done to pension schemes over the last, ever since I've been involved, is just made them more and more costly.
Yeah, this as I see it, Bobby, this is a King's New Clothes episode where clearly everybody thinks it's a good idea to do these things, but actually in reality it's totally impractical.
Yeah, my read of TCFD, the purpose of TCFD, which didn't really happen, was the purpose of TCFD, the modelling, was to show schemes that if they carried on investing as they were and didn't take account of the environment, the capital markets would be destroyed if we had a really bad climate outcome. You didn't need an asset liability model to tell you
that's a catastrophic risk which we can't deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what you can do is try to change things so that you make that less likely to happen, and then you start looking at that. You don't have to do detailed modelling to see, well, if I do this, it might reduce my funding risk by 1 or 2%. The irony was some of the modelling that was done actually said to schemes running climate risk was beneficial to the funding level.
Okay, Bobby, so I'm fully behind your idea of trying to get some consensus behind what is actually sensible reporting, what actually would actually work. But I do think if governments want to impose upon reporting on pension schemes, they should be asked to say, where's the benefit? What is, there should be impact assessments on this, and there should be feedback from the industry. And I don't think that's actually happening at present.
No, it's a really, really, really good point. And I actually think if we get some success on this, and maybe even if we don't get some success on this, then maybe this is just the first target.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a session on climate risk and ESG, but there's plenty of other stuff in pension scheme world which doesn't add value, which this group, the people in this group are people who understand that we should be able to change things given our influence in the market. So I mean, we could pick issues to go back and then work with the APPT, for example, to look at other issues. So I'm fully with you on that one, Bob. And I don't think we just need to do this for climate change. So yeah, that's a good point. Take forward.
I'm going to move on now because William McGrath has been waiting patiently in the wings. Do you want to take yourself where you often do, William? Fire away.
Yeah. Okay. I was just going to make the point that really a lot of corporates should be playing a bigger role here, and that's our particular thing. I think we actually have written a couple of papers on the subject, Bobby, you might like to see, which is really about the rhetoric and reality of the corporates. You know, they talk a really good game on ESG. The chair, the chief exec make a lot of commitments, but they seem to think there's a carve out when it comes to their pension scheme. And I think that's something the industry the pension industry should note and actually maybe see disappear, because when we're talking about resources and commitments, why would you not, if you're a large corporate, include your pension scheme in your ESG thinking? Because you are making through your pension scheme are making a very, very large commitment, and you could decide to put more into productive assets. You could decide to run on the scheme and put much more money or recycle the money into pensions and into current pension provision. It's all there for you. So we would say that for the corporates, they should see pension schemes as being a worked example of their ESG practices in practice. And why not get stuck in, help the trustees rather than ask them to do it in isolation, and traumatic things can change. So one of the little things we're suggesting, indeed, there's this international conference in the middle of October, the government's running, they should say to corporates, get stuck in on pensions. You don't need to do a lot. Just tell your team and the trustees to review the connection between ESG, the corporate, ESG, the pension scheme. And I think you we'll see a lot of progress from doing that. So I think your initiatives here are terrific, because I think there's so much more that could be done in a practical sense if almost like you pool resources from corporates and trustees rather than try and do the whole thing twice.
Yeah, I totally agree. When I first took out ESG training when I was a consultant in my small schemes, first thing I said to them was, your corporate needs to know about this. And we did have a number of small schemes actually who had very active, very well-known corporates. And all of a sudden you find that you don't need your pension scheme budget to look at this. The corporate's very interested in it. You're also happy that happened at the place I was working at the time. The PLC was looking at ESG as well. So I made sure very quickly we got joined up with the PLC on ESG. So yeah, it goes across the whole piece. It goes further than that as well. Actually goes to individuals as well. So increasingly, I'm talking about this stuff with pension schemes. I'm very aware of what I'm actually doing as an individual at home.
I think it's interesting when you actually look at the kind of statements that the chairs of serious companies all around the world, right down through the spectrum, actually say about their ESG commitments. And then you look at the chief exec, and I used to be a chief exec and write some of these statements. You know, they are making really pretty serious statements about your ethos, how your staff are your key feature for you. That's great, but why isn't that being incorporated in your pension thinking? And I think basically, I think you're absolutely right. Again, if you can just find an enthusiast for some of the subjects within the corporate, and it probably isn't the finance director, and it isn't the head of account. It may well be the HR director, or it may be somebody who's specifically involved in the ESG stories. But that is very much maybe the investor relations people. I think those connections are all really important. I see it as it's the team that's lacking here. It may well be the corporate head office teams, you know, and if they all saw there was an opportunity here that the pension scheme could be part of their wider story, because obviously our particular hope is that more schemes run on rather than just try and give it to the life insurer, the scheme to the life insurer. If that is the case, a whole new horizon, sunnier uplands possibly come into the spectrum. And I think I think all this slog that people have done to get where they are today may actually prove to be a worthwhile effort.
Yeah. I think it's slightly harder for corporates to get involved when they look at TCFD and think, how can I do that for my pension scheme? But yeah.
Okay. Draw your attention to some stuff in the chat from Derek. Thank you very much, Derek. I had a question, which was, you know, to whom in government do you address these issues, Bobby? I'm a little bit out the loop on this, and I'm not quite sure where the action is these days. Is it in the FCA or TPR, or is it a DWP thing, or is it HMT? Where do you go? Who do you talk
very
to?
good, very good question. And basically, because the reason I'm expanding my links around the ESG universe and around government, etc., is to find that out. So, for example, if you'd asked me 6 months ago, if I'd done this presentation 6 months ago, I'd have been saying, let's go to the TPR and get them to drop TCFD and do transition plans instead. But having that conversation with the TPR when they were quite open to the idea, they said, yeah, but it's actually a DWP rule. So that's as far as I've got. I have connected with people who do know who to speak to in those areas, and that's why I'm getting this group and etc. set up. So I don't have all the answers of who to speak to yet, Derek, but that certainly is one of the aims of the work I'm doing at the moment with the other trustees, is to really find out who are the correct people to speak to influence here. And we've been able to spread quite far, but we haven't got the exact people just yet.
Yeah, and there was a day when you used to be able to say, "Oh, there's David Farrow" or something like that in government. And you say, "Oh, this is the champion for ESG in government." Is there a single person who we can turn to and say, "Oh yeah, well that's the go-to man"?
Another way to put it, Henry, is the group that I'm sitting down with on the 5th of November. I think one of those trustees will know who. I just don't personally know today.
A bit of pooling resources. Okay, a couple of really interesting questions come in. One from Con, aka Elspeth. If I intend to buy out within 5 years, why should I bother with any of this other than as a box ticking exercise? Is the duration of pension schemes sufficiently long for them to bother?
Okay, when you realise that just by having the relationship with your fund manager, you can influence their voting, and looking at the voting reporting I've seen this year from one of the small consultancies, they do vary quite a lot, and they do tend to get influenced by politicians, and they do tend to get influenced by the US. Any day you still have pension scheme assets with an investment manager, you can affect the stewardship of that investment manager on important issues. So that's one answer. The second one is, if you're going to buy out in 5 years, then you probably can't make whole-scale changes to your assets to make a real difference for climate change over the next 5 years. But you might be able to make little changes, and some of the insurers are getting very aware of this, and most of the insurers are taking it quite seriously, and they are starting now to let clients know what shape of client-friendly assets they would take on at the buy-in or the buyout stage. So it's very hard to change your actual assets if you're going to buy out in 5 years, but it's potentially you could make some small changes. But stewardship, you can, anytime you've got assets with your managers, you've got a very strong voice in stewardship. My £7 million scheme now has a very strong voice with a really big index tracker, and they don't even need to be invested in the stocks they're invested in. Depends on whether you think that your role with that influence is something you want to use to make the world a better place or not. If you just want to use your role to pay the benefits of those members and not be concerned about the world they move into, then maybe you wouldn't want to use that stewardship influence.
Now,
that's a whole different debate.
There is an interesting question that's coming from Jim Woodfield. And Jim, you know about LAPFF, and I suspect that many on the call, including myself, don't. So would you like to ask that question, explain a little bit about why you think the LAPFF is a model for this?
Thanks, Henry. It's a bit of a mouthful to say, though, but yeah, LAPFA, I think, is how they say it in the sort of the quick way. But this is a group of local government pension funds, and they sort of act together to try and influence the ESG outcomes. And sometimes they have more success than others, But it just strikes me that if you were looking to get a group of smaller funds together to then look to exert influence in that sort of investment manager universe and at those sort of bigger corporate clients, then that might be a way of doing it. Or there might be people you could talk to there to find out how they've done it, what's worked for them and what hasn't.
But also, I'd be very keen to talk to them to find out what they're talking to them about, because the more of us that talk about the same things, if we agree with them, the better. And my read of most of the issues that come up here is most of people who've got custody of pension assets tend to the issues we tend to talk to managers about, we could probably agree on. It doesn't tend to be things that we're diametrically opposed to. So any of these groups who are taking campaigns to investment managers, the more people we can become aware of those campaigns, the more people can actually put their voice to it. I even think my small scheme would want to know what's going on there and which things they could get their voice behind, because it's an email, it's not a cost. It's reading what the issue is. Do we agree on this issue? Yes, we'll support it.
I seem to remember as well, the Church of England, they have quite a big, their pension fund has quite a big sort of influencing role.
Yes.
Sort of quite outsized to what their actual investments are. And
yeah.
So they might also be worth talking to about it.
This does seem like a good forum you're building, Bobby, and if you can make it inclusive and build momentum from a wide variety of sources, it will be great. But I like the fact that you're really trying to stick with fiduciaries and not allow this to become a playground for consultants to go and trespass and do what I was a consultant myself, do best, which is prospect. Good. Really interesting stuff, and I didn't think we'd get nearly as far as we have done so far. We're drawing towards a conclusion of this interesting debate. But before I do close anything down, there are quite a lot of people on the call who haven't spoken so far. So now's a good chance to stick your hand up. Okay. Well, Bobby, perhaps you would like now to sort of just wrap up really with some thoughts of your own relating to what's gone on so far.
Yeah. So thank you all for your input. I would, if any of you know people you think I should speak to make the group even wider, then just send me the details. If you haven't got my email, follow me on LinkedIn or send it to Henry, whatever. But I think this is an opportunity, hopefully, to get ahead of the game. I think the regulators will be happy to seriously consider what we say if we put a really good case to them. Whether we actually make a change or not, we'll see. But I think there's a big enough problem if we don't go down the consolidated route with reporting here, that they will need to consider it serious. And what I picked up from today is it will be the start of trying to make pension schemes a bit more efficient. So the government talks a lot about value for money for savers and for pensioners, and consolidation is one way, but making the running of pensions more efficient and getting rid of some of the fluff is another way. And I'm a bit cheered by the latest statement the regulators made on the DB funding code, where they've made it a little bit. They've reduced some of the work needed for the statement of strategy. So, and I think given where we are with the new government as well, I think there are quite a few more ears open than there would be usually. So I think it's a good time to get behind some of these initiatives and try to make it happen. So thank you for your time, and I hope we can make some progress here.
I hope so. And I hope that we can make progress too with Everton Football Club, who dearly need Mr. Dan Friedkin's assistance as they try and clamber off the bottom of the table. Bobby, it's been an absolute pleasure, as always, having you on the call this morning. Can I ask everyone to thank Bobby in the usual way, virtually or audibly? And I think we are, I've said an extraordinary number of hands going up there, Bobby. I think we are yet to have a speaker for next Tuesday, although I'm hoping my good friend Mr. Terry Pullinger may be able to accept. I have asked him, he is not around at the moment. Terry is, of course, well known to union people because of his work with the CWU, not least in helping establish the Royal Mail CDC plan. And we're pleased to see that the Royal Mail CDC plan actually opens its doors, not next week, but the week after, I believe, which would be fabulous. In the meantime, thanks everyone who's on the call. As in the usual way, I ask you to pray for peace in the East and indeed in the Middle East, and wish you all a very happy Tuesday. Thank you very much, and most of all, thank you. Yes.
Thank you.